Hello everyone, and welcome to X-Plane 1150 final release version. We're at Inverness Airport today, and we've got the King Air C90, the default King Air, on the ground in front of us. And the aim of today's video is to go into a bit more depth and play around with the fuel system on the King Air. And this is kind of prompted by my one of my videos that I did on the autopilot use and tips and tricks video, where I covered starting up, but I didn't really properly cover the fuel system, mainly because I didn't really understand it properly. And I've had some very helpful comments on that video from one called NM November Mike, and also done some more reading up, or tried to do some more reading up on the fuel system and the kind of safety features and the various pumps and isolating switches and so on. So I thought I'd do a video today where we look at some of those features and look at crossfeed and do a kind of crossfeed test. So first we'll start with just looking at what X-Plane gives you in terms of fueling the plane. So if you look at edit weight and balance here, left and right side is essentially identical. You've got two fuel tanks. You've got this one here which can take 800 pounds, and this one which can go up to 400. Now, pretty sure the tank, basically where the fuel is, you have tanks in the wing, and I think you have an inboard tank as well, similarly on this wing. But you also have a nacelle tank kind of above and behind, or behind the engine, so I think it's approximately here. So the 800 pounds load is the wing tank, and the 400 is the nacelle tank. And there's a filler, I think that's the filler for the wing tank. So I'm not sure where the filler for the nacelle tank is, or if it's modelled, but you can certainly fill it up from the weight and balance menu. So at the moment we've got about roughly enough fuel for an hour and a half flight. We've got equal fuel in the wing tanks and the nacelle tanks. Actually, let's just check. I think the nacelle tanks are half full, aren't they? So at the moment, yeah. What you're meant to do, I think, is fill the nacelle tank full first before filling the wing tank. So this might be a bit artificial, but as we'll see, when the pumps start pumping, the nacelle tank should fill up anyway. Let's jump into the cockpit then. We're completely cold and dark. And we'll try and go through the proper tech checks. Now there's a really good video by Philipp Ringler, who I think is a contributor to X-Plane, and he covers the fuel system checks, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. But we'll try and repeat them as part of our startup sequence. So the first thing that I got told about was the Firewall Shutoff valves for the fuel. So you may use these, for example, in the event of an accident, if you crash landed, I guess, and you're afraid of fuel pumping into the hot engine and igniting, you would switch these off. You may also, I guess, use them in an emergency if you were starting an engine and you suddenly noticed a fuel leak after the boost pump. Maybe these would help to isolate the leak. But anyway, these I've had different. Well, I've been told that these should be on the hot battery bus, which means that they should be getting power when the battery master switch is off, which it is at the moment. But they won't operate in X-Plane with the battery switch off. So I'm going to turn it on just long enough to shut these firewall valves, and then turn it off again. And the reason for doing that will become clear in a minute, because this helps us test A, that the firewall valves, shutoff valves, are operating, and B, that the boost pumps are operating. I'm going to try and say where some of these things are as I go through, but for now let's turn on the boost pumps. And you can do a kind of audible check of these. As you turn them on, you should hear a pump motor going. It's very, very quiet, so you may not hear it on the video, but in actual X-Plane, if you turn the volume up, you will hear a sort of whining noise or a whirring noise. I've turned both of them on. These are on the hot battery bus, so they don't need the battery isolator switch to be on. So what have we got at the moment then? So the boost pumps sit at the bottom of the nacelle tank essentially, and they are fairly, I think they're fairly low pressure pump. They just basically make sure that there's enough pressure in the fuel line going from the nacelle tank to the engine. So the engine's purely fed by fuel from the nacelle tank. They make sure there's enough constant pressure in there that then the high pressure engine driven pump doesn't suffer from cavitation, which could damage the pump itself. So they're essentially there as a kind of pressure maintainer for the engine pump, and you have to have them on before you start the engine until you're shutting the engine down. If they fail, then basically you have to you almost have, you can't run the engine for very long without potentially damaging the high pressure pump. So they should be on all the time when the engine's running. So now if we turn on the battery so that we get our warning lights and annunciators, you see we have a couple of fuel related ones. There's one up here, left fuel pressure, and there's one up here for right fuel pressure. Now these are on because they essentially are warning you that the boost pumps are not working, or they're basically warning you that there's low pressure at the fuel feed coming into the engine. And the reason they're on is because we've got the firewall valves shut, because the boost pump is pumping away, but the firewall valve is after the boost pump before the engine, so it's stopping the fuel from reaching the engine. So if we now if we now close the firewall valves, you should see those fuel pressure warning lights go out. So if I do the left one first, I don't know if I can quite reach it here. Left fuel pressure light's gone out. And if we now do the right one, and the right fuel pressure light's gone out. This tells us two things. This tells us A, that the firewall valves are working, and B, that the boost pumps are working, because if they weren't on, then we'd have low fuel pressure light. So if I turn off this boost pump now, you see we've got left fuel pressure warning back. Okay, something else we can check now is we can check crossfeed. And crossfeed switch has got 3 positions: off, auto or open. If we put it to the auto position, what it's designed to do here is come on when there's a loss of pressure on one side. If you imagine that one boost pump fails, essentially crossfeed then opens a fuel line that goes between the outlets of the 2 nacelle tanks basically, and the fuel being pumped from one boost pump can feed both engines or the other engine. There's no actual transfer of fuel between tanks. The crossfeed is simply to provide fuel for the other engine. So to test if the auto crossfeed's working, if we turn off if we turn off each boost pump in turn, you should see the crossfeed light come on. So if I'll turn off the right boost pump, we briefly had low right fuel pressure, but now we have crossfeed indicated, which means the crossfeed valve has opened, allowing fuel to flow from the left nacelle tank over to the right engine. Now that will stay open now until we turn crossfeed back off again. Let's put the right boost pump back on, crossfeed back to auto, and repeat the same thing for the left boost pump. We turn it off. Again, we've got crossfeed, and fuel is now pumping from the right boost pump to the left engine. So let's turn that off. Okay, boost pump's back on. Final thing we can check, not quite so important, but is the transfer pumps. The transfer pumps, let's just look outside again. The transfer pumps move fuel from the wing tank into the nacelle tank. They're basically continuously monitoring the level of the nacelle tank, and they're trying to keep it topped up with fuel from the wing tanks. So essentially the pump will cycle on and off to do that, but only when the transfer pump is in auto. If the transfer pump's off, then nothing happens. Now fuel will gravity feed from the wing tanks into the nacelle tank anyway, but you can't get all of the fuel out of the wing because some of it is lower than the feed point of the nacelle tank, so you'll never be able to use that fuel. So to avoid that, you want to have the transfer pumps on, and there's a warning light that comes on. I say fuel transfer low or transfer failure or something when the transfer pump pressure basically drops below, I think it's like a 2.5 psi or something for 30 seconds or more. And that's warning you that, well, yeah, first of all, transfer pumps have to be in auto before you'll even get that warning. I won't get it at the moment because they're working. But what we can do is use the transfer test switch. There's left and right side, and what this does is it basically immediately turns on the pump. Remember, in auto the pump can be cycling on and off, and it also gets rid of the 30-second delay. So what you should see is you should not see any warning light. You may see a brief blip as the pump comes on, but it should then extinguish. There should be no warning light, and that's a successful test. There you go. So there's low fuel transfer there briefly, and it's gone. I'll do the same on the right. Yep. So that's a successful test there. So we're now in a position where our transfer pumps are on auto and our boost pumps are on. So we're ready to start the engine. We've got the handbrake on. Let's turn the beacon on. And we've got our propellers fine. Fuel moved to cut off. Throttles are at idle, which is fine. We'll start the right engine first. The right side is clear, so we'll turn on the right ignition. And we're looking for turbine RPM up to sort of stable, 12, 13 or above, and then we can introduce fuel. Okay, let's introduce some fuel. Low idle. We'll monitor here ITT especially. Make sure that doesn't go above the second red starting line. It's coming back down, and the turbine RPM coming up. When it gets to about 50, we turn off the right starter and we can on and reset the right generator, and we can go high idle to start putting some power back into the battery. Okay, so that's a successful right engine start. We'll also start the left engine now, so similar procedure. We'll just turn the generator off until the engine's sort of spooled up so we don't overload the generator during the initial start. So off with the right generator temporarily, on with the left starter and ignition. We should see N1 come up on the left, and now we can put the right generator back on, and we can introduce fuel on the left hand side. Watch that ITT, as it's a generator assisted start, it might be a bit better. Turbine RPM coming up. All looks good, so we can turn off the left starter and on with the left generator, and we can bring both engines back to low idle. Okay, now if we have a look at our fuel, that's just out of interest. Have a look at the fuel again. Yeah, so you'll notice here that what's happened now, if you remember, we had a certain amount of fuel in the tank and a certain amount of fuel in the nacelle tank. With the transfer pumps on, all the fuel is basically, because we didn't have that much total, we've got enough that it fits. The fuel has all gone into the nacelle tanks, which are now basically full. And you can also look at, if you look at the fuel gauge, it's currently set to show total, which is the fuel in the wings plus the fuel in the nacelle tanks. If we switch it to just nacelle, you see there's no difference, which basically tells us that the nacelle tanks are full and we haven't got anything else in the wings. Well, that's fine for now. Let's turn on some more stuff. Avionics on, EFIS on. We'll put a rudder boost on, because we're going to need that working in the flight. Elevator trim on, and let's turn the flight director on. Let's turn on bleed air. Okay. I think we're alright for altimeter. Inverter needs to come on. Okay, equal load on each generator, that's looking good. Engines are looking stable. We're not going to need any navigation or anything on this flight. guess we should get a transponder ready. Okay. Now, I'm going to do a bit of a run-up. I'm going to do an auto feather test, which is another thing I've not done before, but you should do, I guess, at least on the first flight of the day. So, to do that, actually the test, there's a test position here for the auto feather switch, which you would normally arm before takeoff. The test position basically means that the auto feather system kicks in at a lower RPM or torque setting, so you don't have to like rev the engine really high to kick in auto feather. You can do it at a lower RPM. It also the auto feather arm also arms the engine auto ignition, so we can test that at the same time. So what we'll do, turn the auto ignition on, and that's showing us that auto ignition is active, and that activates below a certain engine torque, whereas auto feather is above a certain engine torque. So what we'll do, if we hold down, I've bound a keyboard key to this test switch because you need to be able to use the switch and your throttle at the same time. Actually, I could have done that with the mouse, given I've got a separate throttle quadrant. No, I can't because I need to move the throttle levers individually. That's why I did it. Okay, so I have key bound to the auto feather test position. So I'm going to put that, hold that switch down, and now I'm going to advance the throttle. And what should happen is when we reach about, it's a torque switch, I'd say, on each engine, about 400-ish pounds of torque. The auto ignition should go off because it's no longer needed because the engines are running at high speed, and the auto feather arm lights should come on. So let's do that. Let's increase engine RPM. Let's increase engine torque by moving the throttle forward. There we go. We now have auto feather activated and we have auto ignition off. Now in this position, if one of the engines was to drop down in torque, then the auto feather system would kick in and feather the prop. So we'll test that. We'll start with the left engine. So I'm going to pull back the power lever, and below about 200 we should have the left engine being feathered. Yeah, so you can see the left prop there, and the left auto feather light is on. I think that's right. Or is it? Should it be the other way around? Because what should happen now is it should be the right. Yes, the right auto feather's gone off because you can't. That's correct. Because you can't. It will not auto feather both engines. And we'll just test that by just pulling back the right now. Yep. Okay. Let's go back to the position where we have okay, let's just test the right engine now. If we pull back the right engine, it should auto feather. Pull back the right throttle. Oops, pull both back now. Just don't want to do that. Let's just get one at a time. There we go. Now the right engine propeller has feathered, and the the left auto feather has disarmed, which is correct. So I'm happy with that. We've also, by doing this, we've put some oil through the feathering system. Let's get these throttles back to idle, and let's release the test switch. Okay, let's get ready. We're going to take off runway 23, so let's set our heading to 230. We're only going to go a short flight, and the aim is on the flight is just to play around a bit with the crossfeed system and simulate running out of fuel on one side. Okay, so we've got equal fuel at the moment, gauges are showing both sides, that's fine. Let's get ready to taxi. In fact, we can turn off auto ignition now, for now. Or should I leave it on actually? Given I know, because I'm going to intend to run down the right engine, so I'm going to actually leave it on. I think that's the right thing to do. And I'm going to leave crossfeed off for now. Going to arm auto feather. Going to turn on the taxi light. I think that's all we need to do for taxi. Right ignition on. Oh, that's the Yeah, auto ignition. That's fine. Ooh, something else I forgot about. We should have had the ice vanes open in the engine. That's it. I forget. There's another name for these things, which I've now completely forgotten. They're not just for anti-ice. They stop any inertia. Are they inertial separators? They may be. They stop things like bits of gravel and things as well from getting sucked into the compressor part of the engine. Basically, they open a door in the bottom of the nacelle that basically ducts particles of ice and gravel and so on away from the air intake feed. And then, so depending on the model of the King Air, I think you can get a kind of performance penalty and an increase in temperature. So you will turn them off again before takeoff. Okay, they should have been on before engine start, and I forgot to do that. So let's just see if we can get some head tracking on as well. Okay. Right. Brake off, and let's taxi. I'm just gonna cut out some of the taxi here, and I'll join you when we're ready to take off. Okay, welcome back, and we are ready to take off here on runway 23 at Inverness. So let's do our final takeoff prep. So engine anti-ice now can come off. We've got auto feather armed. I'm gonna turn on pitot. I am gonna check trim is okay. Flaps are up. We've got our transponder on alt. We've got altitude set 5,000, which is our target climb. We're gonna turn right after takeoff, and I think we're good to go. Autofeather's armed, yeah. So let's just get the brakes ready. Let's advance the power. Keep an eye on the ITT and the torque. See, autofeather is now armed. Okay, that's plenty. We've got a long enough runway. Rotate about 90 knots, it's 80 knots. Okay, gear up. Trim for climb. 500 feet. I'm going to make a right turn now. Just going to bring the prop back to 21. Just going to head north along the coast here for a bit, basically, whilst we do our tests. Let's try and avoid any particularly high ground. Okay, let's just level off here now, and we'll get the autopilot on in pitch and hold mode. And I'm now going to sync the heading. There's a button for that, isn't there? Sync the heading. We'll go heading mode on the autopilot. I'm going to go alt cell and indicated airspeed. And that should take us up to 5,000. as we're climbing now, let's do some more checks. We can turn off our lights. We can, I think we'll leave prop sync off for now. We can turn off auto feather now. Fuel, still okay. Engine gauges are all fine. We're at 4,000 feet already, climbing strongly. Let's just turn right slightly. Okay, we've leveled off. We're going to bring the prop RPM back to about, I can't remember what this is, at 20 or 19. We can bring it back to 19. We'll just bring the power back a bit now because we don't need to go too fast. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically simulate something like a fuel leak from the right wing tanks. You could also imagine that maybe the fuel has been loaded unevenly for some reason, and you haven't got, for some reason, you know, maybe the filling process broke down partway through filling the right wing and there's more fuel on the left. But what we're going to do is actually empty the fuel from the right wing, so let's go, or almost empty it. Let's bring the right nacelle tank down to just above the bottom. Let's take it down to about 11 or 12 pounds. Okay, you'll see that that gauge has dropped pretty close to zero. We don't have any warning lights on yet. I'm expecting to see low fuel pressure soon, or actually the first thing I'd expect to see is a transfer pump transfer pressure warning, because there's no fuel now left in the wing tank to transfer. Which we've still got a fair bit in there. Well, maybe that's because it transferred the remaining fuel from the wing. Let's just have a look again at the... So the transfer pump may have done its job there and just put a little bit more back in. Yeah, I guess it must have done, because we're back. How come we're back at 150? Okay. Let's drop you back again. Let's take you down for £15. Okay. Quite sure what happened there. I thought I had emptied it the first time. I don't think there's much left to transfer now. Don't forget, we've got currently got crossfeed off. We've still got a fair amount of fuel in that right tank. Okay, this is strange. The right tank is not doing what I'd expect it to do. It keeps going back up. Where's it getting fuel from? Let's take it right down to nearly empty. It does seem to be filling back up, which is it's currently got me confused, I have to say. Where is it getting fuel from? only place it can be getting fuel from is the wing tanks on the right wing, and they don't have anything in them. Crossfeed is not cross-feeding. Okay, I'm kind of confused here. Yeah, I can think of is to essentially drop that right back. Maybe just put a very small amount in the cell tank only. Okay, not quite sure what's going on, but now we have right no fuel transfer, and that means there's no pressure on the right transfer pump output because there's nothing in the wing tank to pump. You notice at the moment both engines are still operating, but I'd expect the right engine to fail quite soon, because essentially we're almost completely out of fuel now in the cell tank, and we've got nothing in the wing tank. Now just keep an eye on the gauges, and we will see what happens. I don't think we do have engine auto ignition on the right engine, so if it does stop, it should attempt to restart. Let's just put power lever forward a bit here. Try and drain that fuel a bit more quickly. Use up that fuel a bit more quickly. So nearly at 200 knots. Just going to turn left here slightly to avoid any hills, big hills. And we've lost the right engine. You see that the gauges have swung back and our airspeed is dropping reasonably rapidly, so I'm going to feather the right engine, but before doing that I'm just going to check that it is the right engine that's failed. It looks like it from the gauges. Let's just pull power back on the right engine, and there's no difference in the plane's position or thrust or yaw or anything. Do the same on the left. Yep, so the left engine is still working. So I'm going to feather the right engine. So the right engine's now feathered. That should bring our airspeed back up again. So don't forget, we're operating on one engine only now. Right auto ignition's on, but the engine won't restart because there's no fuel. The autopilot is doing a pretty good job here, I'd say. I'm not quite sure if that's realistic that the autopilot would. I mean, it's banked slightly towards the good engine. I guess it's got your trim, although it's not using it. Maybe it's just using the rudder. In fact, it would be interesting to have a look outside. Is it using the rudder? This is where I figured, find out that I can't change my view. Yeah, I'd say it possibly is using the rudder. Maybe. Not hugely convinced. Yeah, I guess from above it is. Anyway, the autopilot is maintaining. Oops, it was maintaining. What's going on now? It seems to be losing something. Okay, this is not looking so good. We still should have left engine. Oh, we've lost our auto feather on the right engine. Sorry, my bad. I don't know. Just have done something there. So you see how with the right engine windmilling though, we basically almost lost all our airspeed, and we would have soon been heading for a stall, or we'd have had to, you know, lose altitude. Let's just let things come back before we do anything else, and let's watch that red line on that left engine. So I'm just going to let things stabilise. Okay. You notice that we've still got turbine rotation here because of the air coming through the air intake into the engine, turning the compressor and the. What is moving that back? Not quite sure what's doing that. Something is unfeathering. I wonder if it's the auto ignition. I'll tell you what, I'm going to turn that off now. So leave you feathered. Maybe it's auto ignition. Yeah, so you notice we have got turbine rotation. So in theory, if there was fuel, the engine should start. I'm just going to give it a second again to recover speed here. As I say, I'm not quite sure what was. It could be because it could be. I tell you what it is. It's nothing to do with auto ignition. It's going to be noisy throttle quadrant picking up like fluctuations, which because it's only got one lever, it tries to have both of them in the same position. So okay, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, there it goes again. I'm just going to have to be careful with that. Apologies for this. I need a throttle quadrant with separate left and right prop levers. Okay, so without wasting any more time on this, what happens if we turn crossfeed on? So auto ignition can go back on. You can come back off. Let's turn on crossfeed. What do you expect is going to happen? Will the right engine start? Let's find out. Crossfeed to auto. We've got fuel crossfeed because there's no pressure on the right side, but not a lot happening with that engine. Turbine RPM's not increasing. We've got no fuel flow. Now, I think it's correct that crossfeed valve opening won't in itself turn off either of the boost pumps. So I'm going to need to manually turn off the right boost pump because it's pushing back against the pressure from the left boost pump, and so fuel's not getting through. So I'm going to turn off the right boost pump. Fuel should then be cross-feeding, and the engine should then start, and we're just going to have to be careful to unfeather it before the ITT gets too high. So let's turn off the right boost pump. Let's leave this feathered for now. You'll see now we've got ITT shooting up. So yeah, unfeather quickly. Probably a bit late. I'm not quite sure what I guess the proper procedure is that you gradually unfeather. I mean, that's obviously got ITT that's way too high, and effectively we're almost like, I'm not quite sure why we seem to be windmilling now, but I might just feather it for a second to give the plane a chance and then put it back. I'm sure that's not the textbook way to get the engine restarted, but it doesn't help when your prop levers have got a mind of their own. Yeah, there's very high ITT there. I'm not quite sure why. I think you probably would start it in feather, and then gradually, as it span up, you would unfeather. I don't know. Anyway, we're now back. Engines are both running evenly. Fuel crossfeed is on, and what's happening now is that this left nacelle tank is now feeding fuel to both engines. Now, if you read the King Air magazine articles, and I'll leave a link to those as well in the description, you're not meant to use crossfeed to run two engines, although it's not a technical limitation apparently, it's more of a legal thing. A single boost pump has got enough pressure or enough throughput to supply both engines' engine pumps, and the crossfeed line itself is big enough to supply the fuel. So technically the plane will fly just fine. And in fact, one of the uses for crossfeed is if one of the boost pumps fails. You could argue that we've simulated that by turning this boost pump off. So yeah, what we really want to do now, I guess, is we just make our way back and land, and get our fuel sorted out, get both wings filled evenly. So I think that's it for this little test flight. I would be interested to know more about the engine restart procedure in flight, as to whether you do. I guess you start feathered because you'd have it feathered when it was not rotating, and then I'm not sure about is how much turbine RPM or torque you let it build up before you unfeather. But yeah, so crossfeed is quite happily doing its job now, and we can continue our flight. So that's it for now, and thanks for watching the video, and goodbye for now.